Everyone, thank you. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Melissa Millar. I am the Coalition's consultant. And on the call with us this morning are our steering committee members, some of which you may know from your work in the community, including Ms. Lori Kaplan, who's a former CEO of the Latin American Youth Center, obviously Gretchen with Fair Chance, Kim Perry with DC Action, Charlene Flaherty with Community of Hope, Debbie Shore with Sasha Bruce, Nahama Masliansky with SOM, Ryan Trout with CNHED, and Adam Meyer with Pathways to Housing DC. And as Salome noted, we are open on our steering committee and we welcome more members. So please, if you're interested in joining, please add your information to the Jamboard. You can reach out to us in the chat. We meet monthly. It's certainly not a big time commitment, but we're making big strides and we would be welcome to join you. We welcome you to join us, rather. Salome, please, you can advance the slide. So the purpose of today's meeting is to receive some updates on what the government's been doing and what the steering committee has been up to. And we do have a distinguished guest to bring you some updates on the government side today. And if we have time, we want to share with you just a few examples of some of the solicitations we've noticed, just to give you some ideas of language to look for, how the government is expressing the act. And we also will have an interactive opportunity, giving you all a chance to share your own stories about how your organization has been successful in negotiating or renegotiating your indirect cost weights on your grants and contracts with the district government. We're curious about how long it took, any challenges you faced. We really do want to know. And as you may know, the mayor's proposed FY24 budget is going to be coming out in a few weeks. So we'll share with you some high-level talking points and encourage you all to go out and testify for relevant agencies with respect to the work your organizations do. And really, at the end of the day, we're here because of equity. This law really gives an opportunity to correct the relationship between DC government and its nonprofit partners, because it provides ways for nonprofits to develop and use their indirect cost rate. In this particular fiscal year in FY23, it's for grants and contracts valued up to $5 million. In FY24, that increases going up to $10 million. And so this law mandates that I would like to turn it over to Ms. Kim Perry. And Salome, if you could go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Do we have our next guest on the line already?
Salome, can you unmute your Lena?
He's joining in about 2 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Given that, why don't we, while we're waiting for ACA Parker to join us, why don't we go to Adam? Adam, do you want to talk a little bit about what the coalition has been doing over the past couple of years to support the district's implementation of this law?
Greetings. Good morning. It's great to see everyone. Well, the good news is we were working for the better part of 3 years in order to get the law passed. It was passed by the council, approved by Congress. Now the real challenge is getting the law implemented. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is meet with each of the leadership of the district government to inform them about this law and to get it implemented. Now, one of the big things that we've noticed is the implementation of the law has been scattered. Some of the nonprofit organizations have seen that contract managers are meeting and understand the law, but many others, the overwhelming majority, are not finding this. And it is the reason why we're having this training session today, because we want everyone to understand the nature of the law and to know that when you go in to negotiate with district government agencies, take with you a copy of the law or call us to become familiar with the law, because it is imperative that the city agencies come into compliance with the law. Is there a bit more time or should I continue, Gretchen?
Here, Lena, have we been joined yet by ACA Parker?
She's joining in a second. I'll let you know, Gretchen. Give me a second.
Okay, let me just ask Melissa, a number of people in the chat have commented that you froze at the end of your intro. Was there anything that you said prior to introducing Kim that you'd like to share? So
It
people
was
can-
this. It was the section, Melissa, you had mentioned, and then we'll have some talking points for budget season. And then that next bullet is where you sort of dropped off.
Gotcha. I'm sorry. Yeah, I seem to be having some connection difficulties. So we'll be sharing budget season, talking points, and ultimately we're here because we want to talk about equity, right? This law is here to reset the relationship between DC government and nonprofits. And this fiscal year for this law, FY23, contracts and grants valued at up to $5 million are the ones that are affected. And in a few months, we're moving into FY24, and that's where the proposed budget that's coming out in a few months, or a few weeks rather, will be. And then grants and contracts valued at up to $10 million are going into effect. So this law is really having an opportunity to drastically change the relationship between DC government and nonprofits. And really what the law is mandating is that the district provide additional funding to cover these nonprofit costs. So we just want to thank you all for participating with us here and being part of this change in this nonprofit and DC government relationship. So it was just a shout out to you all for being part of this change.
Wonderful.
So maybe we could have Adam do the second part.
Hello. Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that some of the agencies are understanding the laws and others are not. And I'll give you one example. At Pathways to Housing, we had a contract with the Housing Authority that lasted, there was a 15-year contract, believe it or not. And for those 15 years, Pathways was unable to get any administrative costs added into the contract. It just paid for the rental of the units. And as a result of this law being passed, we got in touch with the agency and with our contract managers early in the process and informed them that when we were going to be sitting at the table to negotiate this, we expected the nonprofit equity law to be implemented. The first response was, we're not sure where the money's going to come from. But after a number of meetings over a number of months, finally the agency found the funds and they told us that they were going to be able to pay the administrative expenses. Now, as I'm saying, not all agencies are familiar with the law, but it's very important at the beginning of the negotiations that you talk to the agency individuals that you meet with and with the contracting officers to make them aware of the law. Secondly, some nonprofit organizations have been told, well, we're going to keep your payment rate at the same level, except you can bill for your administrative expenses, which in effect means that services will be reduced. Now, that was not the intent of the law, to reduce services. The intent of the law was that it would allow us to continue services at the existing rate and receive our administrative expenses. So we're asking if you go to the table and are told that the budget cannot be increased for this operation, we want to have that information. We want to have it in our database. And we want to make sure that when we approach the city council during the budget hearings, that we can give these examples to the government and urge that the mayor increase the budget for those agencies, or that the city council in their reviews increase the budgets to bring us in compliance with the law.
Thank you, Adam. I'm just thinking if we still don't have ACA Parker, that Melissa, we could go to the examples that you have found of for solicitations.
I'm on.
Oh, terrific, terrific. Kim, you're going to introduce ACA Parker.
Yes, thanks so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, ACA Parker. We're
I'm
glad
just
to have
Lindsey. Thank you.
Okay, great. So everyone, we're going to move on to the next section of our agenda. And so joining the coalition today and all of our partners is our special DC government guest, Assistant City, I can't say this 10 times, Assistant City Administrator Lindsey Parker. ACA Parker and her team, along with several other DC government personnel, have been meeting with the coalition throughout implementation of the Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act. And so ACA Parker is here to provide us with some updates on how local government has been thinking about the implementation of the Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act. So please provide a warm welcome for ACA Parker. I will say that we are going to try to hold some time immediately after just for a few questions. So feel free to put them in the chat and we will start to collect those, and then first come, first serve, we'll get those answered. ACA Parker, welcome, and I will turn it over to you and Yerlina.
Thank you so much. Kim Perry, it's so good to see you. It's so wonderful to see so many faces that I know of leaders that do so much for our city. So thank you so much for all you do and all you've done, particularly over these past couple of years, to make sure that we're taking care of those that are underserved, but also those that are most in need. Can't say enough for the nonprofit community in Washington, D.C. You all are rock stars. Again, I'm Lindsey Parker. I'm the Assistant City Administrator in Mayor Bowser's administration. What does that mean? It's a good question. I ask myself that a lot. But I am the essentially a deputy mayor equivalent responsible for a cluster of agencies. That cluster includes DC Human Resources, Office of Contracting and Procurement, Department of General Services, the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. I also happen to be the CTO, as well as Office of Disability Rights, Office, I said Contracting and Procurement, and Office of Risk Management. And so I get to work closely with the mayor's budget team and the mayor's budget director, Jenny Reed, and we both work for Kevin Donahue. So if you think of Jenny and my roles combined, we're essentially like helping the COO of an organization run things. And so I'm, yeah, Lori, I saw you too. So good to see you. I wanted to come today to go over some things that I know you already know, but want to make sure we're all on the same page. And then also just catch you up on where we are in implementation of the Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act. And so I'll try not to get too bogged down in details so that we leave some room for questions. And Yerlina Santos is on the call. She works for me in the Assistant City Administrator's office and helps with grant management. Now, I would argue we have some room to grow when it comes to essentially managing grants in Washington, D.C. Government, but Yerlina has done yeoman's job of really helping agencies be a little bit more coordinated, be thoughtful, and we're getting there. Progress is being made, is what I should say. So we'll go to the next slide. Wanted to just make sure that we were all on the same page. The Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act of 2020 became effective on March 16th, 2021. And, you know, interestingly enough, and this is something that Jenny Reed, the mayor's budget director, joined a smaller call with some of the leadership of the association to talk about the fact that this bill was passed with zero fiscal impact is what the council relayed. The truth is that before any law goes into effect, there ought to be a true financial analysis and really assessing what additional monies are going to be needed that weren't accounted for in the budget. With this, we know, as you all know, that there's going to be new monies needed in order to make sure that we're able to fairly compensate all of you for your work. Now, the problem is that was never contemplated. So the budgets never were impacted as a result. And so there are some, as Adam pointed out, there's some agencies that are going ahead and moving forward with this and implementing it because they have the wherewithal in their budget to make room for it. There's some agencies, however, that we know will have to ask for programmatic cuts in order to actually implement this. And so I wanted to sort of make sure that we baselined that there's just never been a financial assessment of this bill prior to it being passed. Even though it was passed and said that there was no financial impact. We know that there is a financial impact, and so now what we're doing is catching up and trying to make sure that we have an assessment of that. And so we'll get into that shortly. We'll go to the next slide. Just a few things to kind of make sure we're level setting on actions that have been taken since 2020, actually. Once we knew that the bill was about to pass, grant managers received the Act timeline and requirements summary in December 2020. In January 21, grant managers received another reminder, in fact. And then in March 2021, obviously the law became effective, as I pointed out. In June, agency directors and their general counsels received communication regarding the implementation of NFCA. And then we also received an email. So agency contract officers also received an email. And I'm telling you all this because in our somewhat confusing bureaucracy sometimes, we have contracts with nonprofits that are obviously impacted by this act, and we have grants that are impacted by this act. And those don't get moved by the same individuals all the time in every single agency. Sometimes there's a grant manager who is completely separate from the procurement team. So we're trying to make sure that we're educating and edifying both streams of that type of worker, the grant manager, as well as the procurement specialist, and also the operations folks at an agency. We'll go to the next slide. So that was June. July of 2021, we had a lunch and learn for contracting officers to discuss and ask questions. In October, actually OCP attended DC Government General Counsel quarterly meeting to share grants updates, including the NFCA implementation. I'm sorry, that wasn't even OCP. That was Yerlina, who attended that DC Government General Counsel quarterly meeting. In November, there was a best practices roundtable for independent contracting officers, which included a discussion of NFCA. And in December, we know that the grant managers meeting also covered the NFCA requirements. So, basically, we've tried to inform as many people as possible. And then we'll go to the next slide. That being said, we know we need to do more. And so it's a two-pronged approach that we're taking now. So one, we're going to have some upcoming listening sessions for you and others that want to talk to us about an NFCA, what you've seen, agencies in compliance, agencies not in compliance, folks that are doing things well, why they're doing them well from your perspective. And so the dates are posted. I realize the times are not, which is worrisome, so we'll get that right. And we've got a link with the times included following each of those dates. So March 28th and April 13th are the 2 dates for the listening sessions. And we'll make sure that we get this to you as well. We'll post it in the chat shortly as well. But in parallel, back to that budget issue that I mentioned at the beginning, is we're going to be conducting a survey to collect agency information. You don't have to do it right now, Yerlina, because we see your screen. We'll do it after we take the slides down. But the administration will be conducting a survey to collect information, including those cost drivers related to implementation of the NFCA. So we're actually finalizing the survey right now. unfortunately, this comes at a time when Jenny's team, the budget team, is rapidly trying to put pencils down on the mayor's budget, which is due to the council on March 22nd. So pencils down day is Saturday. It will most likely be Monday because of some of the revenue shortfalls that we're seeing in the out years. And so it's that same team that we want to make sure that we're completely in line with and pushing that survey out. So I suspect that the survey will go out late next week to agencies, and we'll make sure that you all see the questions that are going out to agencies in that survey. But just generally speaking, it's what grants are you providing? What grant dollars do you have to provide to nonprofits? What contracting dollars do you have to provide to nonprofits? What are the current budgets for those individual grants or contracts? And then what is the programmatic cost? And what would you anticipate the NFCA cost to be? And additional monies that you might need in order to fulfill what is in the law. So once we get that information back from agencies, that's when we'll be able to better understand the true financial impact of this and determine what agencies need additional funds in order to comply fully with the law. And so I'm going to end there to allow for questions. We'll pull the slides down. We'll put the listening session information in the chat, and I'll take questions if that's okay.
Yeah, that is just fine. Thank you so much, ACA Parker. I just want to emphasize for everyone the dates of the 2 listening sessions, because I know folks will want to attend that. So it was March 28th and April 15th.
Yep.
And the registration information is here.
April 13th, but we'll
April
put
13th.
We'll put them in the chat. So Yorlina, why don't you take down the slides and copy and paste that information into the chat for everybody.
All right,
so that nobody sees your screen. You want to take down your screen so that we don't have to see everything else on there. You can just stop sharing.
And then we want to invite folks to come off mute. Do we have time, Gretchen, for 1 or 2 questions?
Yes, we do. And there is a question in the chat, Kim.
Yep. When will survey results be due from agencies? It's a really good question. What I should say is let me come back to you with exactly when the survey. So first of all, I'm going to come back to you with survey questions to make sure we've kind of thought about the universe. And if there's anything that you want to add, we'll be happy to add that. Secondly, based on that, finalizing that survey and when we get it out is going to be dependent upon, right, when we ask for it back. Typically, when I push out surveys of this type, I think about 10 days is usually the timeline that I ask for agencies to come back with information on. I'm also going to be pushing this out when everybody is just going to receive their budget and then going to have to get ready to testify on their budget. And so I might have to allow for some wiggle room. I don't want to say a date right now, but as soon as I know when we're exactly going to send the survey out, I'll be able to tell you when we're going to expect results.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Good question.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Lori.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Lindsey, what do you recommend that nonprofit leaders do in the meantime?
Yep.
You know, as you noted, it's being disparately implemented, in some cases right, in some cases not at all, and in some cases cutting services. And there's still this looming question about what's happening with the federal pass-through money. So what do you recommend? You know, when a nonprofit director goes in to negotiate, someone said early on, take the law. But how do you think we should really negotiate and manage all of this until you've been able to do what you want to do that probably won't kick in entirely, perhaps until fiscal year 25? So do you have any recommendations for agency leadership on how to handle this?
Yeah. It's a good question. And I think actually the exchange that we've been having with a regular cadence of meetings you know, shout out to Melissa, who's really, in my opinion, gathered all of the intel that you are sharing so that we've got a comprehensive understanding of what agencies are doing, what agencies are following the law and able to follow the law with the budgets that they have. And then also a little bit further there, also following the law and doing so in a way that like makes sense to you all, right? It's easy for you all to sort of deal with. I think that's going to be helpful so that we'll have lessons learned about the way that we're going to be asking everybody to implement, because I think it'll just be a continuous improvement process. But secondly, making sure that we understand who is not able to, right? Because those might be some of the folks that we have to focus in on first, with contingency funds, if we have contingency funds, caveat. And just other sort of quick budget fixes, if necessary. So basically, I think the answer to your question, I'll just sort of reiterate it again, is continuing to share that information with this group so that we've got one link that has every agency and what's been good practice, what's not working, who needs a little bit more hand-holding, and in fact who needs potentially more money.
Great. Okay,
Is that
thank
fair?
you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. Any other questions? I have one last question, perhaps, and that is, ACA Parker, what direction will be given to agencies in order to calculate expected expenses on their grants and contracts? Because every nonprofit's indirect rate is different, correct? So what kind of guidance are they giving to come up with some estimates?
So OCP has a pretty thoughtful training module on that, and we'll make sure that we share it with you. The challenge there is kind of what's the right idiom? Horse or cart before horse. We don't know how much we're talking about in terms of cost yet, in order to, I think, be super thoughtful on providing such guidance. And so I think that's going to be part of that survey. Those survey questions kind of coming back in. What allowances do you need to be able to comply with this law? Like, what are you seeing in the current programs that you are funding today that you will need to increase? Where you will see pricing or you will see cost increases. That's kind of what we need to get at before I can say to you, we're super clear on that guidance in my mind, if that's fair.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. Thank you.
And we're going to have to work together on it, I think, right? That's another kind of one of those things that centrally making sure that the leadership of this group understands where you see issues with understanding there will be very helpful and illuminating to kind of get to the right perspective on that guidance.
Yep. Thanks for that. That's fair. That makes sense.
I have one question. What time, this is very logistical, what time are the listening sessions on April?
That was what I was assuming that Yorlina was figuring that out. Yorlina, do you want to let us know?
Yeah, I'm putting everything together so you guys can have everything together in the chat. But March 28th is at 11 a.m. and April 13th is at 4 p.m.
Wonderful. Thank you.
All right. That's helpful. Well, if there aren't any, do we have one last question?
Charlene, agencies have been provided with language to be included in contracts. Yes. Yorlina, have they been provided language for grants? I don't think so, because all grants are different.
For grants, no, but contracts, yes. For grants, because we are a pass-through, and then we have local grants. It's a little bit challenging, but a lot of the agencies are aware of the Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act.
Yep, they're aware of the act. The issue is because of the different kind of the different laws that folks have to comply with in grant making, whether it's federal funds, whether it's local funds, whether it's other foundation funds. We've found that providing grant language consistently across the government has gotten us into trouble in the past. And so this is why we want to make sure, this is sort of the cart before horse thing again. We want to make sure that we completely understand the impact of what the law does and then we'll be able to get to a better place with guidance. And it might be, if you're providing federal funds, here's the language that you can use. If you're utilizing federal funds for these grants, here's some language that you can use. If you're providing local dollars in that grant, here's some language that you can use. We're just going to have to, that assessment is not yet, I would say it's not yet super clear.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So ACA Parker, we will let you go. We know you're busy and have a lot going on. We do want to just say thank you so much, not just for joining us today, but you literally have sat with us, rolled up your sleeves, and worked to problem solve through all of this. And so we are internally grateful. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this, and we appreciate you.
No, I really appreciate it. And again, I'm just Lindsey. I feel like that title thing is overblown sometimes, and it sounds a little bit like a cappella group. What is ACA? And so I'm just Lindsey. But I also just have such tremendous respect for so many of you, and sort of the work that you do and the work that I've known you to do over my career in DC government. So yes, it's not there's not a straightforward. There wasn't a quick solution here, and I apologize for that. But we are working, and I think we're making progress, which is exciting.
You're right. Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. We're making progress. We're just so thrilled to have this level of attention to the act, and again, we'll just continue to move forward.
Thank you, and thank you all.
Yep, thank you so much, and thank you, Yerlina. We appreciate you as well. And to all of our coalition members here, don't hang up. We still have more on the agenda. As you guys know, it was great to hear these updates from our local government partners, but there's still so much work to do on the act. So we are next going to hear some more about communications with council during the upcoming budget hearings, negotiation stories, tips, and tricks. So I am going to pass it over to my colleagues. Who's up next? Should we continue?
Melissa.
Okay, great, Melissa. The floor is yours.
Yeah, Salome, if you could advance to the slide. Yeah, that one. So I just wanted to just quickly, since we were discussing solicitation language, just briefly before we go into your experiences. These are just a couple of examples that I have found. The steering committee were reviewing FY23 examples of solicitations to see how this act was being presented. So the language in red is from CFSA, and it really doesn't address indirect costs at all, except to say that they are not cost reimbursement allowable expenses. Contrast that with the language in red, the DBH nurse temporary staffing. It's
in green.
In green, sorry. It starts with naming the act, the Nonprofit Fair Compensation Act. It mentions organizations that may have the federal NICRA, the negotiated indirect cost rate, and the 4 additional ways that an organization could develop and use an indirect cost rate that the law allows. And it further mentions federal indirect pass-throughs. So this is the type of language that we're hoping that the government sort of starts to default to. We're starting to see it in grant and contract solicitation examples. So as you're reviewing RFPs, start to look for specific references to the act and specific references to these 5 ways to calculate. And if you're not seeing these in solicitations, please bring that up with the grant or contract administrator. And now may be a good time to talk about some of your experiences. So Gretchen, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. I just want to say that if you go into a negotiation and the person that you're talking to does not seem to be aware of the act, and while the city is trying to get the word out and trying to do training with contracts and grants officers across the entire government, as you just heard from ACA Parker, it's difficult. There are lots of people in different roles. They change frequently. So you may bump up against a contract officer or grants manager who wants to limit your indirect cost rate on your grant or contract, and which really forces you to subsidize the government. And what we're saying is we've got to stop. We have just got to stop saying that that's an okay behavior on the part of the government, because it's not, and it's actually breaking the law. So we encourage you to nicely say that to the contracts or grants officer that you're aware of a law that has been passed that allows you to actually receive your certified indirect cost rate. And in the law, there are, as Melissa said, 5 different ways that you can do that. If you don't know what the law is or what those are, we have a copy of the law and talking points related to the law on the Fair Chance website, www.fairchance.org/advocacy. There's an advocacy landing page, and on that are all the various materials that you will need if you want to try and educate your contracts or grants officer about your rights to claim your true indirect cost rate on this contract or grant. And then if you receive any pushback from that person, you can ask them to share it with their general counsel or to speak to their general counsel directly for the agency. And please let us know about your experiences with that. We want to know, and as ACA Parker said, they want to know. So we're going to try and hold the government accountable, and the government is trying to hold itself accountable. It's just a very big government, and this is a complex law. So now we want to hear from you about what experiences you have had over the course of this past year in your contract and grants negotiation. If you've had any contracts or grants officers say, nope, you can't, you can only get 10%, or you can only get less than 10% on this contract or grant. If that's happened, we want to hear from you. Or if you're in a situation where you've been asked to cut services in order to claim your true indirect costs, we want to know that as well. So Salome, can you pull up the Jamboard? And we're going to do that. Just look at it and see what's there for a few minutes before we move on. And as that slide said, you know, you're a part of this coalition. We're here to help you. So if you're having any challenges around this, feel free to call one of us, join the steering committee. You know, we've come as far as we have, quite frankly, with the government being responsive, because we have been showing up at the council hearings. We've been visiting council members in their offices. We've been talking about the fact that this law has not been implemented fully, and it's 3 years out. Anybody have any experiences? Okay, we got a couple up there. Yes, the issue with foundations is very, very real. We are hearing that as well. A lot of foundations are claiming that they will be able to give fewer grants because their investments are down. And yes, so it would help all of us very much if this law would be fully implemented. Thank you for pointing that out, that we're really moving into tough times with our foundation funding moving forward. And so not having to subsidize the government is going to help all of us. And
there's also a note in the chat, not on the Jamboard, that says, hello all, I'm joining late, but how would you all suggest navigating this law when entering into a contract as a sub-grantee through TCP, who receives grants from DHS directly? Are we entitled to the 10% as a provider who's a sub-grantee with government?
Does anybody want to answer that? I have an answer, but I want to, Melissa, as our
or Debbie
legal
has her
person.
Yeah.
Well,
Debbie has her hand up
this
for that one.
This is Debbie, and I don't have the answer, but I've brought this to their legal counsel specifically and shared the law and waiting to hear.
You brought it to TCP's legal counsel or DHS?
TCP.
Awesome, thanks.
Amanda, the law does say that subgrantees should be treated the same way as the original grantees. So in fact, I think you probably should. I would imagine Catholic Charities has a higher indirect cost rate than 10%. So I would imagine you should actually be able to get more than just that de minimis 10%. But the fact that you're a subgrantee, honestly, the way that I read the law, should not preclude you from getting that rate.
But Melissa, would they be negotiating that with whoever TCP gave the grant to, or would they be negotiating that directly with TCP?
I think it would probably be with DHS, but the law specifically saying that subgrantee should be treated the same. Like it should, I think it should work the same way the federal pass-through should be working, that the privity is technically with DHS ultimately, and it's flowing through down to ultimately who is doing the work on the ground, who in this case would be Catholic Charities. And so that rate should be flowing all the way through to Catholic Charities.
Yeah, I would say we see this actually with our HUD grant. So our HUD pass-through through TCP is less than 10%. And I wonder, when does that catch up? Because we are, as big as we are, we don't have a federally negotiated rate. We just don't meet the threshold. So some of our federal HUD grants are, coming through the COC, through TCP, and it is not 10%. We find the same in other parts of state, so that DC law wouldn't apply. But I don't know how to navigate that, honestly.
I'm seeing some very, very specific experience in the chat. I'm seeing some very, very specific experiences with particular agencies like HUD. I'm glad to see that there was a positive one from OSSI on the Jamboard. And we are hearing from ACA Parker's team that there are some restrictions coming through the federal government on some overhead rates, which seems like very interesting that the federal government would be limiting nonprofit overhead rates. In general, the NICRA situation has been a positive thing for nonprofits, but for then the legislation to say we're limiting the amount of overhead rate is really, really frustrating. And so that, if that's the case, we need to know that, because that's then something we have to take up with the federal government. So please let us know exact, very, very specific examples like that so we can do more research on it.
It does seem, though, from the Jamboard that TCP is sort of all over the place. And, and so perhaps, Debbie, when you share with the legal counsel, and you can get a meeting with the CEO there, and we can try to work through some of this specific with TCP.
Yeah, I would wonder how that works with the COC grants from HUD, because I've often wondered, so is TCP taking the other 7% of my little 3% admin? Do you know what I mean?
Probably.
And, yeah, I assume they are.
Yeah,
probably are. Yeah, they are probably, because it's.
And that's one of the things we know, that on most federal pass-throughs, you are supposed to be getting your NICRA, and we know that there are agencies that have been limiting indirect cost rates and keeping those federal dollars. So, we're very.
So that's a good point, Gretchen. It's probably good to know when you're negotiating something, what the originating source of the money it is. Absolutely. Is it federal money that then the district is RFPing, or is it DC appropriated money? Because that will give you some clues too on how to manage this.
Absolutely. And I'm very disappointed at seeing these federal pass-throughs that are limiting overheads to the state or the district agencies. And I know the National Council of Nonprofits sees this as a nationwide issue. And I know they would be very interested in knowing about this, so we can pass it on to them and their work with Congress this needs to be elevated to a national issue, not just a DC issue. And we know that there are other states that are looking at this and doing the same as we are. Nonprofits are the business, are in our businesses, and we need to be treated like that. As a sector, we cannot continue to subsidize federal, state, local governments in doing services on their behalf.
Yeah, and in the past, we weren't able to question these things, but now we are because of the law.
True.
So I'm looking at the time. I so appreciate the comments in the chat. I appreciate people, please continue to populate the Jamboard. While we wrap up, we've got some important things to talk about, particularly how you can be involved in helping to ensure that this law continues to be implemented. We need your help. They're tired of seeing our faces. So I'm going to pass it over at this point to Debbie and Adam to talk about what's next for the coalition and for our partners such as you.
Well, in summation, what I'd like to say is I was so pleased to hear the conversation that we just had from Lori. And what this means now is that the government is learning about this. We're part of their education process. So we have to enter in our meetings with the government from a really confident perspective. And that is, we know there's going to be a transition. We know what the ultimate goal is, and the ultimate goal is that we all be treated fairly. So I just want to say that feel free to contact us whenever you need to. Feel free to join one of our working groups. And I know on behalf of Pathways, I'll give you one example that we had to accept a rate that was below what we were legally entitled to. But the good news is that we are getting some of the funding. And in the next negotiation, I think that's when we'll be able to get full funding. So it's a process, but enter this process confidently. Debbie, would you like to add some thoughts?
Sure, I would. I would just like to say that in addition to everyone here becoming really competent and understanding what the law is and the strength that it brings us for negotiation, the other way that we can all participate is to speak at the public hearings. And we talk about this in the steering committee, and I hope you all will too, as a culture shift. We need to have the larger community understand better what we already know, which is that we play such a critical and important role in the community and with the government, and we need to be treated differently in terms of how we are supported. And our ability to receive the administrative rates that we are actually paying is what every other corporation and the government itself is able to do. So, we really need to stand on that. And I would strongly urge people to look at when the public hearing and roundtables are, and become a witness and bring this forth. And bring forth how it's impacting you. And because I think that, we really need to elevate the conversation. So I'm very grateful to hearing about what Lindsey is doing. And this is a terrific effort. And please join us. Please join us in giving us information, and please consider joining us on the leadership team. So thank you.
Thank you, Debbie and Adam, and thank you for the continued comments in the chat and hopefully on the Jamboard, which I'm not looking at right now, but hopefully you're continuing to populate that as well. Melissa, do you want to wrap us up?
Sure thing. So we'll have in the presentation, there are some talking points, and there are additional links to talking points and more information on Fair Chance's website. And so again, we just want to thank you all for coming and participating today. And we again encourage you to pay attention to the mayor's budget, which comes out in a few weeks, and to sign up and go out and testify and talk to council members. And just FYI, the steering committee has been in front of virtually every council member and or their staff over the last few months. So we have been bringing this issue to council. So for you all to come out and force during budget would just be great and really reinforce the messages that we have already been sending this year. Additionally, the steering committee has been working on an op-ed, and if your organization would be interested in signing on, please reach out and we can add you to that. And additionally, if you have any questions about testifying, please feel free to reach out. All of us on the steering committee are old hands at this. Some of us used to work at the council, so we have insider knowledge and are happy to share that with you. And we have also, the steering committee, reached out to a pro bono attorney just in case, to have something in our back pocket in case we need to push the government just a little further. So if you or your organizations have any interest in being part of any potential litigation that may or may not be necessary, we just want to protect ourselves, please, again, feel free to let us know and document your stories. Like the assistant city administrator said, they want to know what's going on. The steering committee wants to know what's going on. The council wants to know what's going on. So please document your stories, tell us your stories, and feel free to go and talk to everyone about the experiences you're having, so that people in charge understand that there is real pain points that comes when nonprofits are subsidizing the government's work. Remember that we're in this together, solidarity. So thank you all for participating.
Melissa, can I add one quick thing?
Absolutely.
If you hit up against a bad negotiation, if you can let us, and you see language that's really bad in an RFP, let us know so that we can send that information to OCP. Because maybe OCP will even revise the solicitation. And sometimes they revise them so many times. But anyway, the coalition can call OCP and say, look what was in this. This is really bad. I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and finally, I just also wanted to say that if you are on this call and you do not have a certified indirect cost rate, either by the federal government or by a CPA, we did a training through the coalition a year ago on how to do that. That was very well received. That slide deck is available on our website under Fair Chance Advocacy Coalition. It's there. And I just really encourage you to talk to your accounting firm or and figure out how to get yourself a certified true indirect cost rate.
And if I can just also add that there are talking points for what to bring to budget hearings relative to this that are very specific and helpful to, when you're developing testimony. So that will come out to people and you can utilize that. And I would encourage it.
This is Charlene. Just one final thing too. This is like a top-down, bottom-up effort, as most advocacy is. So it might be uncomfortable to talk to your contract administrator at the agency level, but this is such a great chance to educate them, even though this might not be implemented in their agency because of budget constraints. But this is just a great time to be a partner with them and to educate them about what's coming down the pike.
There's a question in the chat, and then we'll go about how often you need to get your indirect cost rate recertified. Was that clear in the law, Melissa?
It wasn't something that they addressed in the law. I know Karen notes that they don't have a NICRA. For organizations that do have a NICRA, I know that that process seems to happen every few years. So even if you don't have a NICRA, that may be like a general guideline. But for those of you who do this regularly, if you have thoughts.
Debbie,
You have a NICRA, it's every other year, I believe.
but in
And
the
you
case
have a
where you
NICRA
don't have
because
one,
you have a federal grant.
if you don't have a NICRA, we got ours certified last year by a CPA firm. I would assume that would be good for a year or two, but probably after that, we need to get it redone. It's not clear in the law how often you need to do it. But you probably something you need to do every other year, every 2 years. All right. If you need to find us, we email any of us, gvanderveer@fairchance.org, mmillar@fairchance.org. We'll happy to take your questions via email or, again, keep populating that Jamboard right now and we'll go back to it and we'll get back to you. We had 42 participants today. That's exciting. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to the steering committee and to Melissa. Everybody have a great rest of the day.
Yay.
Thanks, everyone.